Okay guys, in this video I am answering a question about organization of code. So we're going to discuss different ways that we can organize code to make it a little bit cleaner and neater and easier to deal with. Essentially what I did here was I just made a form with 4 buttons. Now all the buttons do the same thing. If we run this code here, I'll show you. Let's see, we'll just put like 2 and 3, it's going to equal 5. 4 and 3, if I hit this button, should still be the correct answer. Let's see, 6 and 3 is 9, and I don't know, 6 and 5 is 11. So you can see they all just add, they do the same thing. But the difference comes in the code behind page. So basically I have 4 buttons, and the question that I had was about regions, whether or not you could use regions inside of subroutines. Now you can't use regions inside of subroutines. So here's a long drawn out way of writing this code, and I did this purposely, not that this should be an example of what you want to do, but it's just an example of how you can take the long code and make it a little bit more manageable for what you want to do. So you can stretch it out here and create all of your variables for your text boxes. And then in this particular case, you need to receive the variables, receive the text box values into the variables. Then you need to convert them into doubles. And then once you convert them into doubles, then you can add them together. And then once they're added together, you change it back from a double into a string, the answer, and the answer comes out on the label answer text box. So it's pretty straightforward, but it's very stretched out. So I basically, instead of using regions inside of here, because you'll notice if you try to activate a region, nothing happens. Okay, so the first thing that I did to try to divide up some of this code is by using the comments. It allows you to tell the reader of the code what the code's actually supposed to do, and then you can kind of separate it like that so that you know each section you have. Now, in order to make this a little more clean and neat, if you don't want to have everything in the same subroutine, the best way to do this is to break down your different sections and put them in separate subroutines. For example, the first thing that you probably don't want to do is in a button click event, you don't want to have a whole bunch of code in a button click event. The reason being, maybe you're going to use some of this code somewhere else. So if you decide that you're going to use it somewhere else in your code, well, you can't call the button click event very easily. So the first thing that most programmers will do is they'll create a subroutine. We'll just make it add 2 values together, and then take this code, drop it into this subroutine, and then under your button click just reference that particular subroutine. Now this makes it so that your main code, it can be stored elsewhere. You can call this from anywhere, so anytime you need to add these 2 numbers together, you can just call the add 2 values together subroutine and use it. Now you can break this down farther, which is what I'm going to show you next with button 2. Now button 2, what we do here is, instead of having, we have our initial string values, we have our receiving the values from the text boxes. So we did that much there. And then we want to convert these. But let's pretend that our conversion is a lot more than just the CDBL with their value. Let's say it's some kind of code that takes up several lines of code, and you're trying to clean this section up. So rather than running a whole bunch of lines of code to change those conversions, you create a function that you can send an item to and get back a value. So you're going to send the string value and you're going to get back the double. So we go down here, I have a region made with functions, and in that functions we will have our convert values to double function, and we'll send in a value and we'll send back a double. So in this case we send in the 2, let's say, as a string value, and here it's convert values to double is A, so we're taking the value that we're getting from text box A and we're sending it as a string to this function, and then this string is being converted to a double named B, and it'll return B, so that essentially C will equal the double of that value. And the same thing here. We're sending a string, get back a double, so D equals a double, and as we see up here, D was in fact a double, and so was C. Okay, then the second part of it is we broke down the second part for adding the values together. And in this particular case, let's say that we're doing a lot more than adding. Maybe we're adding one thing, subtracting another thing, dividing another thing, and it's a bunch of lines of code. Here again, rather than having a whole bunch of lines of code here, we simply call the add values function, which is down here in our region where we have it divided up. You can set your regions anything you want, so you can divide your different functions to however you want to, and you can also have regions inside of regions. So I could do a region for conversions, and then maybe I put my convert value to double function in there, and I put my convert value to string function in there. So now I have my conversions, and then I can have a region additions in this case, or it could be, you know, whatever you want to call it. And in here I can put in my functions that I have to add my numbers together. And then this further file it away for me so that I have functions, and then under my functions I have everything cleared up to the way I need it. And it makes it nice and tiny for me. Okay, so that's essentially the idea there. First order of business is to pull your subroutines out of your button clicks. You don't want to keep them in your button clicks. You want to move them out so that you can use them with other things. And then you want to take your code and you want to divide your code down into sections that could be used other places in your code later on if you need them. Plus it'll pull longer sections of code out of your main code and allow you to make it a little more condensed. And then you can put it into regions separately and have all your functions and your, not necessarily functions, they can be subroutines also that you're following. Okay, now in this particular case, I have a third example here, which is your answer text. And then I can just do my double of text box text plus a double of the text box B text, and then make that toString, and that answers that. And then I have button 4, which essentially takes that and calls a function to do the same thing, where we take answers, which is in our additions thing here, and function answers, and it takes in two values, A and B, so text box A and text box B, and it'll return a string to go to your label answers. So then in here we create a string and we do our conversion here, much as we did in this one here, and then we just return the string back and it answers the string. So now in this case here, while this is a lot more condensed and more to the point than this one here, button 3 can only use this particular code. If I need to use this somewhere else, if I need to add two items together somewhere else, then I'll have to rewrite this code. So even though this is a little quicker and easier right now, it's not necessarily quicker and easier in the long run as I'm writing my program, or as I'm adding onto the program at a later date. So that's the purpose of separating it into a function, where here I can call answer and I can send in any data I want, as long as it follows the values. So when I need to have, anytime I use answer, you can see I need to have A as a string and B as a string, and it's going to give me a string back. And in this case, it's just going to add the two items together. So so this kind of shows you that even though you can't put regions inside of subroutines, you really don't need to if you're writing your subroutines correctly. Your subroutines should be decisive and to the point. It should be a subroutine that does a certain purpose. And when you do subroutines this way, later on you'll be able to work into classes, and you can actually put them into classes. And what a class is it's a separate file that you keep your functions in. And so it keeps it completely off of this page. It keeps it in a separate file under your solutions, and it's just a class file. And a lot of times that comes in handy because you can create a class file that has certain tools in it that you need for a specific purpose. Let's say, for instance, here we have our adding. Let's say we're building a calculator, and our calculator only takes two values, but you can add those two values, you can subtract those two values, you can divide them, you can multiply them. Well, you can create a class page that has all the functions for that. And so it'll have a class function named add, it'll have a class function named subtract, one named multiply, one named divide. And then you can call them just like you can call these functions here. You can call the functions wherever you need them. So then maybe button 1 will add, and button 2 will subtract, button 3 will divide, and button 4 will multiply. And it's all the same thing then. Then you just call them just like you did here. Then it's the answer text box equals, and be add, subtract, multiply, divide, whichever, and the two values, and it'll return the correct value. That way you're using the same class. You're using it's not being bound up in here. It's not a code that you write out and then you have to rewrite it all the time. You just use your answer, your add, subtract, multiply, or divide, and then send the two values that you need, and you can use that anywhere in the program. So that's the purpose of classes and changing your functions separately. You can do the same thing here. I could have done an add, subtract, multiply, divide function and called these here directly too. The only difference between the classes and having the functions here is that they're on a separate page completely. So it just makes it a little simpler. You can use it on more than one page. You can take that class file out of this project and put it in another project and use those tools. So you can think of it sort of like a toolbox. If you have a toolbox that has several class files in it that you have pre-made, and you can be working on several different programs, and you just say, oh, hey, I need the addition and subtraction ability for two values. Okay, well, I have that in my in my mathematics class or whatever, and then I just go in your folder and include it in your project, and you're ready to go. So it's just as simple as that. Where here functions, this works good for one project, but you would have to remember which project you keep that particular function in. It's not as easy to transport between things, and it's only for this page, not another page, so you would have to copy it to another page if you're going to use it. So that's kind of the point behind classes, and that's the next step beyond this. But for right now, so that you can understand, that's why you don't need regions under subroutines. If your subroutine is that long that you feel that you need to divide it up into regions, well, then you need to look at those sections and determine whether those regions can become their own subroutines or their own functions. And in which case you would pull it out, you drop it down into your functions, and then you just use a call statement to call it. And that way, like I said, it goes down the line then from there. So start out with the functions, learn to separate your functions and your subroutines from your main routines. Learn to divide them down like that and use them as tools, not just code. And once you can do that safely with the functions, then look into classes. And then you can transfer your functions into a class. It's not very difficult to transfer a function into a class, but that's a little bit beyond the scope of this video. So I hope this helps you organize your code a little bit better. Feel free to post in some examples if you have them, ask questions. We're here to help, and I thank you for watching.